Okay, it's Sunday night, and I said earlier, I'm not just doing this, I'm having a good talk with a friend, and we'll talk in a second. Yesterday, but I think my friend Jamal would like to hear this story. I'm with Jamal right now. This is my brother Jamal. And today we went to a couple of the ministry things. So I went to the church, and I mentioned on a video yesterday that today I wasn't sure if I'd talk. But I want to tell a story of a brother that I met yesterday. Now, I'm not going to give the name, but he's an older guy, and if I gave the name, I guarantee Jamal would know him. But I'm not going to give the name. And he's maybe 65 or 66. Now, he's been around on the streets, for years now. And I never talked to him because most of my friends are openly using or struggling, and so I'm more like with the brothers that some of you have seen on my videos, actually. But this man seemed to be, I thought maybe he was retired and he goes to the free feedings to get free food, you know. Now, if you need food and you're hungry, that's okay. But some people, they actually have a lot of money and they go to all these missions and all. So I've seen this brother around over the years. And yesterday I was at the park. I did a little teaching video, some of you saw. And as I was sitting there, and I got there very early yesterday, this guy showed up, the same one who everybody pretty much knows. And I don't know how it started, but eventually I told him, I said, you know, brother, I'm a retired firefighter from city of Kingsville, and I worked 25 years. Then he started opening up to me. He said, at the end of our talks, and I'll get into some of what he discussed, because that's what I wanted to talk about. He said, you know, I've seen you all these years, and he knew my name at this point, John. He said, I've seen you all these years, John, and I never knew your story, because I told him a lot about, you know, how I got to Texas and everything else. His story is this. Now, I'm not giving away anything that the authorities don't know, but it has a lot to do with authorities, crime and federal prison and everything. Back in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, he was 16 years old, and he is from the city of Kingsville. And as I mentioned some of the older captains, the names of captains that I work with, because he maybe doubted that I'd spent 25 years working at the Kingsville Fire Department, because he is a hometown boy, hometown family, and his family had all of the contracts to start all of the hunting tours and the King Ranch, Sarita, and all these areas. A very successful family. And they had all of these connections with all of the ranches and everything. And as a young kid at the age of 16, because his family was so influential, lived his whole life in the city of Kingsville on a street called Richard Street, right where one of the little farehouses happened to be, he got into smuggling into the country, from out of the country, huge amounts of cocaine. Now, when he first started telling me the story, the reason I believed him is he doesn't talk. Most people don't really know this man's background. And if I said the name of the guy, I guarantee you Jamal knows this man, but I'm not going to say the name. And at the age of 16, they brought in half a ton. These were being flown in, I guess, from Mexico, but landing on the various ranches that his family business had managed. And his whole family was involved in this, by the way. They're dead now. And because they had all the people at the check gates at Sarita and everywhere else always let them pass because they were well known as a family that started all the wildlife management tours, everything else, and they got into drug smuggling business. So one night, at the age of 16, they brought in, and he told me it was 1/2 ton of cocaine. And as the plane landed on one of the ranches where they were doing all this, the federal authorities did a raid. The two older men that he was with fought it out. They had a gunfight. Both of the other guys were killed. And he himself did not engage in the gunfight. But because he survived, and no federal authorities, I don't believe, were killed, but it was indeed a federal drug raid, therefore, they had some charges on him because it involved a shootout with federal authorities. So at the age of 16, they offered him an option. At this stage, you're talking about the early 70s. And they told him, here's your choice. Now, he had a scholarship to play for a professional baseball team, or different ones, scouting, because he threw a fastball at 92 miles an hour. And he was a pitcher for my Kingsville friends, and he went to the high school, Henrietta High School, whatever the name of the high school in Kingsville, that was his high school, had a scholarship. But then this bust happened. When this happened, he told me that night, when the feds raided, he ran into the woods. He's in very good shape, and it took him 3 days hiding from the authorities to get back to the city of Kingsville. And he did it all like he was illegal, basically, like coming in the country. He knew all the back roads and everything.
Yeah, the wrenches.
When he got to Kingsville, he called his dad, and his dad told him on the phone, he said, say nothing more. He said to his son, he said, I'm looking at the authorities all over the house right now, all over. So they knew it was him, that he was involved in this, the kid. And so he didn't go home that day. Now, he evaded the authorities for so long, eventually they caught up with him. And they gave him this option. They said, you could join the military, or you're going to face very severe charges. Though he didn't shoot anybody, there were indeed people killed that night, and federal authorities were shot at that night. Now, he told me this was the biggest drug raid, meaning a half a ton of cocaine is a lot of cocaine, and I doubted him at first, but as he continued to tell me the story, I believed him. He said it was in the papers as a big raid. Now, everybody from the small town of Kingsville, in which I worked, and all the names I gave him of my older captains, this guy, he knew them all, went to school with them all, so it began like he started opening up more. He did 10 years in the Marines. Now, I believe he saw active duty, that would be the Vietnam era, the late 60s. He joined, I guess, as soon as he was of age. I'm not sure if he had to be 17, 18. Goes to the scenes action, is a Marine. And he said, John, when I got out of the Marines, at this age, he would be about 27, 28. He said the federal authorities decided to pick up the warrant, even though they kind of made a promise to him that if you join the military, we would drop this. But it wasn't just a local case. It was involved for the He said, so after 3 days of him getting out, meaning they kept tabs on him the whole time, thinking when this guy gets out, we're going to pick up this case. They picked up the case. He was very upset about it because he said, he figured he did 9 years in federal prison over this charge. So now at this point, when he got out after the 9 years, you're talking he's about 38 or 37. So that was 20 years now, 10 in the Marines, about 10 in prison. And I asked him, how did you wind up in basically the homeless population in Corpus Christi? He said, John, after all those years, now he was successful. The night of the raid, he told me he got $17,000 cash just for the assistance he gave at that time. And obviously this was a family business and he was younger. But the only person that actually took, according to him, did prison time was him, because the others were killed. The one older guy was killed the night of the raid, and the other one was injured real badly and died like 2 weeks later. After he finally finished all of this time, 10 years in the federal prison, he said they gave him like a settlement when he got out of like 60-something thousand.
Wow.
Maybe something that had to do with they shouldn't have but gave them the charges. I said, but how did you wind up homeless, brother, in Corpus Christi? Now, he told me the checks that he makes, okay? I could tell you, because I'm not giving you his name. He gets a Social Security. He gets also like a disability. Overall, he gets more money than I make every month for my retirement. But he said when I went back to the city of Kingsville, he said no matter, and he lived right on one of the streets where the little Station 2 firehouse happens to be, like right on Richard Street. That's why he was so amazed, like all the years I worked there, he lived right down the block. A lot of times when this was going on, eventually when he got back out of prison, of the years I'd be on the fire department there. Eventually, he said no matter where he went in Kingsville, because I know it's a small town, he knows it's a small town, He said the federal authorities as well as the cops, but he said the feds, because you all know what their vehicles look like. All my friends on the street, when there are feds around, everybody knows what the vehicles look like, okay? And he said neighbors would call and say, so-and-so, they're outside right now, they're down the block. He said it was like I was living in a police state, John. He said even though I finished all my time and I served, and I believe he saw action, and I don't think he was wounded in the war or in Vietnam, but he saw action. He said, I felt like I was in a police state. That's how you would describe it. And then he said, because Kingsville was so small, the community, it was such big news in the papers in the late 60s, and famous, because his family is like a famous name in the city of Kingsville. He just chose to live in the street. And he lives in Corpus Christi, and he's part of the homeless population. And by the way, Jamal, he lives downtown, but which is where my friend kind of stays, my friend Jamal. But he comes to Timmins. Don't give the name.
I know.
And I thought, I knew this guy for so long, seeing him, but we had a good talk.
Yeah.
And the reason he opened up so many of the story was because I happened to be familiar with Kingsville, and I knew a lot of people he knew. And I wanted to just do a video to tell that story because he also told me it was the way the system treated him after the deal and all, that a big part, because basically he said, I got screwed. Meaning they made certain promises to him and they didn't keep those promises. Mm-hmm. And I feel like though we could also look back, he shouldn't have got involved, but he was only 16. It was really, if you will, a family business that he was as a kid coming up in. And I don't, if we break the law, we understand we're going to pay penalties. But I've had more than one person tell me, John, I made a mistake, whatever it was. I did a jail thing, or a drug deal, or whatever it was. But many of them have said, but the way it went after that, they should have looked how I was doing at the time, that I was not, that the justice system, they felt, messed them over. Now, I'm not making excuses for crime. But that was a testimony, the one I just told you, that I felt I wanted to talk about one day, because that's such an interesting story.
Yes.
And today and it was Sunday, and I didn't have a chance, and I wound up, I saw Jamal, who's a friend of mine. I saw a lot of my friends at Church Without Walls. It was a homeless ministry in the Bluff, and Brother Ray preached a message. I wanted to videotape at Church Without Walls. Ray wouldn't mind, I just haven't done it yet. But he gave a message from Kings, I think it was 17. And that message is a story of Elijah going to a woman. And Elijah, the prophet, is sent, and the woman just has a little meal, a little bread. She doesn't have a lot of stuff. And God says to Elijah, go to that woman, and he asks that woman, get me some food, get me something to drink. And the woman says, I don't have nothing. As a matter of fact, I was out gathering some sticks. I was going to make one last meal for me and my son, and then we were going to die. That's the famous story. I didn't read it recently, but Ray spoke on that. But the woman obeyed. She made a little bit of food for Elijah and gave it to him first. And then, if I remember the story correctly, it's interesting because he gives us some instructions. Now, I didn't read the chapter recently. I think it's King 17. Sometimes I get annoyed when I start teaching because I don't plan on teaching. But what he says in the instructions to the woman is, go borrow empty jars or empty bottles from all of your friends and all of your neighbors, and then bring them back to the house. So she goes, her and her son, go get as many jars as you can get. She doesn't really understand what's going to happen. And then he says, because you obeyed God and you provided for me, but take from that jar that you gave me a little bit from, and pour and fill up all these other jars. Sort of like the miracle of the water into wine. In the New Testament, in the Gospel of John, there were 6 water pots, and these were changed into wine by the miracle of Cana of Galilee we read about the wedding. So in this story in Kings, I think 17, after she gets the pots, the prophet said, now just pour of the oil. From the one little jar, pour into all those others. And they filled all up. And she goes back to Elijah and says, They're all filled. There's no more. And at that moment, the oil ceased. And it's interesting. I have the feeling that maybe she doubted about the miracle and borrowed some. And then once it started happening, maybe she thought, oh, can I go get 50 more? But no, the ones you borrowed, you borrowed. As soon as you fill them, I kind of always thought maybe she thought I should have got more. And she was, no, you don't get a second chance in that. That's the miracle and you're going to get. But that was a story Ray preached on. And it was basically sometimes, and this is a lot of the talk I've been having with Jamal before I turn this on, and I didn't plan on doing it because some of the best fellowships I have with my friends are not on camera. But I wanted to tell that testimony, and I wanted Jamal to hear that testimony about that one brother. So you take the little bit that God has given you, and you obey God with the little bit that you have. The other verse I quoted, I should share this. I don't think Jamal would mind because it's actually a testimony. I'd seen my brother Jamal a few times the last couple of weeks, and he told me, you know, John, I was doing good and I was clean, and then I messed up. And of course, a lot of my friends do. It's part of the process. But then he mentioned, I said, well, when did you start getting clean again? When did you begin the process? It was the day I made that video. He told me the day we were at Timmons, if I got it right. And I talked to Joni, and she has got 40 days clean. She was on the video that day. She after she came back to visit, but she has now 40 days clean. And I remembered when Jamal mentioned that to me, I thought that's interesting because there was some seed, you know, he's been through the process, he knows, but there was some seed that encouraged him to start walking the straight path. And to me, that was an encouragement, even though, you know, he's not as good as he wants to be. But I thought, oh, that was interesting. So that day, that little fellowship I did with Jamal on video, it wasn't wasted. But I guess one of the points today, this will be the only video you will see tonight because it's already, what time is it? And I'm still sitting with Jamal. It's 20 after 5. But I'm going to have him say a word if he wants. I know Jamal's a brother, a Christian, because look, we've been having some good talks. The message from Ray's message today, Church Without Walls, would have been, obey God in those little things. And the act of faith that that widow woman did, understand, she just had enough food for her and her son. She's gathering some sticks to cook it, and they were preparing to die. But yet at that point of death, if somebody asked me, give me what you got, look, I wouldn't be thinking about anybody else. I'd be thinking about, are you kidding? I'm fixing to die. My son's going to die. But she obeyed in that little act. And what happened was God did turn it around. But the scripture I was quoting to Jamal earlier was, people sometimes ask me for a verse, but it was from Proverbs. A just man falls 7 times and gets back up again. A wicked man falls once and stays down. So God in that verse defines the just or good or righteous man, not as the one who doesn't fall, but the one who falls and gets back up. The wicked, I have a lot of friends, a lot of discussion, Jamal was, I got friends who are using or are drinking. They have no intention to get back up. They have no intention to have any clean days. The only clean days they have is because they couldn't get enough money to get high. But I have other friends that are struggling, they feel guilty and convicted, and then they get, okay, I'm on the road to recovery again. And so that's the just man defined by that verse. Now, I talked a little bit. Jamal, what do you think about what's the Lord been saying? He knows I'm bad with the camera.
Hi, my name is Jamal once again.
Yes, I'm bad with it. What do you think?
The main thing I have to say is on what you had just, what you just quoted about the gentleman that you didn't mention his name. That's an awesome testimony. You know, for him to go through that makes me feel better because I can make it through. I mean, he went through a lot worse situation than I did. It makes mine feel a little bit weaker. But at the same time, what I want to explain to everybody in general is that it doesn't matter how deep our conviction is or how small our conviction is, we might take it the same way. Like, I might take my conviction, I might lose my brother. Let's say I lose my brother. I might take that I might handle it well. As for you losing your brother, you might handle it total out of control, want to commit suicide, want to do a lot of things. You know, my point is, what I'm saying is, a lot of us, we give things to the Lord to handle, but we're not actually giving it to the Lord. Like me, I give everything to the Lord. I live on the streets right now, and I hurt, I struggle, I've lost everything. I'm on federal probation. I'm on the run from the feds, all this stuff, all in one box. And I still have faith. I still put one foot in front of the other. I still wake up with a smile on my face, you know, because the Lord, He's forgiven me. I mean, He's taken everything. I guess the weight off me. He's not allowing me to stress. You know, He's just allowing me to keep on moving forward so I can find my purpose, you know, or live my purpose in life, you know, or get to my purpose.
And a lot of your story before I turned it on, that's why I felt led to tell the one story about that other brother on the beginning. A lot of what Jamal was talking about is sort of like, I won't give the names of people he met, but he happened to meet some. This is a very good testimony, what he was telling me. There's a lady that he met one day. He's living on the street, and it's a very nice lady, and just like, hey, maybe I could bum a cigarette from you. And she had the one like me. I kidded him. I said, oh, you're just like me. But this is a lady that started helping Jamal. And then he found out she was very prominent in the community. Not well known that a lot of you would know, but someone who climbed the ladder in the executive world. And it was a surprise to him how this person's very genuine. I'm sure she's a believer. And yet at the same time, that it made such an impression on Jamal because they're still friends and they still communicate. And she was willing to not see him like as some bum on the street, is how he was saying it. And those are the things that stick with people. Part of that was what we were talking about.
I want to say this person's name because she's awesome, but I'm not, because I'm gonna respect John because of what he's doing and how he's running his little thing here. But yeah, it's awesome, man, to have somebody, and she works at Wells Fargo, by the way. But so high up, just to have belief and faith. And I'm at the bottom, you know, I'm rock bottom. Look at my hair, you know, look at me, you know, and just for her to have some kind of belief in this person, that she sees something in him, you know, I mean, that's awesome. And then not just me, I'm pretty sure she's so genuine, she sees it in a lot of people that are struggling with whatever they're struggling in life. It might not be on the street, it might be in different situations, you know, but you know, I just want to say thanks for the time, and just don't give in. Just don't give in, man. Because it doesn't matter where you are in life. You're gonna have mind games. You're gonna have problems. You're gonna have the devil shooting at you. You're gonna have all of this, regardless if you're in an executive position or you're on the streets, you know, or you're, you know, at the church, you're the pastor, or you're somebody who's just serving them. You're gonna stress. Not stress, but you're gonna go through trials and tribulations, you know. So if you don't just give it to the Lord, you're gonna stress.
You know what's interesting, and look, the more I've talked to Jamal since I've known him, I could see, I was telling him, some of my brothers, they know the Lord, and yet they have a lot of problems going on. But the confidence that the ones that know the Lord and are also struggling, they actually have a confidence that I know the Lord. That upholds them. Now, everybody on the street does not have that, okay? Mm-hmm. There's some that do not have that. True. So I see the differences between those who are struggling and know the Lord, mm-hmm. and those who are struggling, they really do not know the Lord. Yeah. So it's but I'm not going to have Jamal, because we did, but whatever. Yeah. I'm going to post this. No, I'm glad. I want him to talk. That's good. But I'm saying I'm not going to have him tell a lot of his story about, which is somewhat, almost relates a little bit about the other guy I mentioned earlier on the video. And that's why I want to say it. a lot of people, when they get in trouble with the law, okay, there are legitimate reasons why certain things happen. But then there are times where the system can make certain mistakes, and the system can then change the trajectory of their lives. And they could also at the same time, Furman often says, who I saw today by the way, but he often says when he was doing his prison time, he said a lot of the brothers, John, they'd be praying, Lord, get me out, Lord. And Furman would always tell me, he told those guys, no, we are paying a debt to society that we owe, but at the same time, when the debt's paid, we have forgiveness. But the area that sometimes the system messes up, like the first story I told, is then they carry that like a grudge on people. And then the people, after they do the time, or after they, I realized talking to that brother I mentioned, who I talked to yesterday, I realized why he's living on the street. He makes more money than I do. I had another friend years ago, they did a federal raid where an actual federal officer was murdered on that raid. Now this was, I think, Wyoming or Colorado. But that friend told me once, he was on the street for a while, I won't give his name. He said, John, it's hard for me to live inside a house anymore because the raid that happened that day, and they still he was going to join the Coast Guard, this friend of mine. He used to be on the videos. And when he went to join the Coast Guard actually were the ones that told him, you still got an open FBI file on you because federal authority was killed that day. And that's when he first realized it. But he felt uncomfortable being inside because he always thought they're going to come get me.
Yeah.
And I didn't mention that to the older brother that I spoke to yesterday because I asked him, I said, brother, you make more money than I do. And I realized he's also got side jobs. And I said, and he's a vet. And I'm in the system now to VA. I said, why are you on the street? And then he really had certain reasons, but then I realized he felt so boxed in when they were going to each house, surveilling each house he was in when he was in Kingsville. I realized the reason he became homeless out here is because of that sense of I'm being trapped and I'm being followed. And by him living on the street, it's less of that sense of that feeling.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to end with the prayer. Let's see how long that. Okay. Father, I thank you for Jamal sharing his testimony. I felt it was important. I also thank you for all the brothers that we saw earlier today. I pray for Jamal. I pray for everybody who watches the video that you would just do a work in us. We go one day at a time. Some of the verses I was quoting where Jesus said, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will take thought for things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Each day we have certain things we've got to deal with, and we don't have grace for things that we don't know are going to happen. We have grace for today. Tomorrow, when it gets here, it will be today. It'll be the next day. We've got to live day by day and live in the moment. So I pray you'd give us that grace that we'd be able to just live this day by faith, and every day that the people watch this video in the future, they take the same advice. We ask a blessing in Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, Jamal. God bless everybody. You got to see Jamal. Wave. See? Okay. God bless.